Hello, welcome to Chapter 6, Section 3, Transformations of Cube Root and Square Root Functions. Today we're going to transform cube root and square root functions, and we're going to do it the exact same way we've done all of our transformations so far. So, let's talk about what these functions look like. So, a square root function has a radical, and it looks like this equation, and it's the graph below it. So it's a little swoosh. And the reason that the left side of the equation isn't there is because, remember, the square root, when you take a square root of a negative number, it becomes imaginary, so you don't actually graph those numbers. So we have to remember that when we're talking about the domain of this function. The cube root function's over here, and it looks like this. It's a sideways cubic function, right? Because they're inverses. And so what happens is they reflect in a certain way. If you look at the square root, it's like a sideways parabola, but only the top portion. And that's how you can tell the difference, because the square root only has that one right side, but the cube root has the left side. And the reason it has the left side is because you can take the cube root of a negative number, because a negative number times a negative number times a negative number is still a negative number, right? It's still an output, so it still works out. So let's get into transformations. I'm going to try to make this very fast, because we've done this so many times. And the way that I'm changing it is just by changing the function. So make sure you read the instructions, right? We've got to make sure we use the correct function. But aside from that, it's still I high, inside horizontal inverse, and outside vertical same. So if it's a translation 5 units up, right, that's vertical, so it goes outside. So it's the square root of x plus 5. And it's plus 5 because it's going up. And remember, outside we do the same. The 6 units down, same idea. Square root of x, but minus 6 because it's going down. 4 units left, that goes inside. And now the inside is the radical. So it's the square root symbol. You have to make sure everything looks like it's inside. If something's outside, you can cut it off and put a little line down so that we know that's the end of your square root. So we have x, and since it's 4 units to the left, it's going to be plus 4 because it's the opposite, because inside horizontal inverse. And then for the 1 unit to the right, same idea, right? We have our square root, and it's x minus 1 because it's on the inside. Reflections. Remember, reflections are negative, right? It's just a negative multiplied to the front. Now the question is, does it go inside or outside? Well, if it's in the x-axis, that means it's over, it's a vertical change because it's going from top to bottom, which means it goes outside. So it's just the negative, in this case, cube root of x, because that's what's right here. For the other one, it would be the cube root of negative x. Now we have stretches and shrinks. Remember, a horizontal stretch, that goes inside, and we flip it. So instead of a 5, it becomes a 1/5. So we've got our inside, 1/5 x. So don't forget, stretches and shrinks are multiplied. We are multiplying. So that's why we have the 1/5 in front of the x instead of added behind it. Now we're doing a horizontal shrink, still horizontal, so it still goes inside, so that 1/3 becomes a 3. So this is the square root of 3x. And when you have a vertical stretch or shrink, that's so these two right here, we leave it alone. We're going to use that number, and it goes outside. So it's going to be 1/4 square root x, or 2 square root x. Now we have multiple things happening at the same time, right? So we have to do things one at a time. First, we do our horizontal stretch by a factor of 3. Well, the horizontal stretch, that means it goes inside, right, I high. So that 3 becomes a 1/3. It's a stretch, so it's multiplied. So it's the cube root of 1/3 x, followed by a translation 10 units down, which means we're going to take this, write it again. So we have the cube root. I should pay more attention to how I write this. Make sure that the x is not in the denominator. 1/3 x, and then minus 10, because it's moving down 10. All right. Now we have a vertical shrink, and just for the sake of color, I'm going to change it this one time. So we have a vertical shrink by a factor of 1/2. Since it's vertical, it stays the same, so it's just going to be 1/2, and then the cube root of x. Why did I use the cube root of x? Oops. Times the square root of x, followed by a reflection in the x-axis. And when we have a reflection in the x-axis, it goes on the outside, and it's negative, which becomes negative 1/2 square root x. Please be careful. That is not a division symbol. Have a good day.